Imagine this. A family excitedly moves into their dream home, ready to start a new chapter. But before they can even settle in, their landlord shows up, shouting insults and calling them no good. The situation escalates as the landlord tries to evict them, convinced they don't belong there. What he doesn't know is that this family isn't renting the property. They own it. Yes, you heard that right. They are the new owners of the house he used to control. What happens next? Will he realize his mistake? And how will the family handle this shocking and unfair encounter? This story takes a surprising turn you won't see coming. Stick around as we unravel this jaw-dropping moment that highlights both the struggles and the triumphs of this determined family. You won't want to miss how it all plays out. The landlord, Mr. Jackson, had owned the property for years and was used to controlling who came and went. To him, the sight of the new family moving in was an insult he couldn't tolerate. He stormed onto the property, shouting accusations and demanding they leave immediately. The family, Sarah, her husband James, and their 2 young kids, were stunned. They tried to explain that they had legally purchased the house, but Mr. Jackson wasn't having it. "People like you don't belong here," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Sarah and James exchanged a glance, their disbelief quickly turning to resolve. They had worked hard to save for this home, going through months of planning and paperwork. But instead of celebrating their achievement, they were now being humiliated in their own driveway. The neighbors started peeking out of their windows, curious about the commotion. But the family wasn't backing down. James stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Jackson, we bought this house fair and square. We have the documents to prove it." But the landlord scoffed, waving them off as if their words carried no weight. "I don't care what papers you've got," he barked. "You're not staying here." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she refused to let fear take over. "We're not going anywhere," she said, holding her ground. The kids, sensing the tension, clung to her legs, their wide eyes darting between the adults. Meanwhile, some neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, murmuring among themselves. A few looked uncomfortable, while others seemed intrigued by the unfolding drama. One woman whispered, "A family like that moving in here. No wonder he's upset." The words stung, but Sarah stayed composed. As the confrontation dragged on, James silently wondered. Was this just about the house, or was something bigger fueling Mr. Jackson's anger? Mr. Jackson's frustration boiled over as James calmly but firmly repeated, "This is our home now." Refusing to listen, the landlord took a step closer, pointing a finger in James's face. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? I've been running this place for years, and I know who belongs here." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she stayed focused. "We don't need your permission to be here," she said, her voice steady despite the growing tension. The kids were now huddled near the car, watching silently as their parents faced the confrontation head-on. The small crowd of neighbors grew larger, their whispers turning into murmurs. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. "This is getting out of hand," one man said under his breath. Then, just as the atmosphere hit its breaking point, a car pulled up to the curb. A sharply dressed woman stepped out, holding a folder and striding toward the group. "Mr. Jackson," she called out, her tone firm and authoritative. "We need to talk." The landlord froze, his face twisting in confusion and anger. Sarah and James exchanged a glance, wondering who this woman was, and whether she was about to help them or make things worse. The tension was now palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The sharply dressed woman stopped in front of Mr. Jackson, her expression calm but stern. "I'm Olivia Carter," she said, holding up a business card. "I represent the real estate firm that handled the sale of this property." She turned to Sarah and James. And you must be the Wilsons. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Mr. Jackson's face flushed. "I don't care who you are. This is my property, and they have no right to be here." Olivia raised an eyebrow, unshaken by his outburst. "Actually, Mr. Jackson, this property legally belongs to the Wilsons now. You were informed of the sale months ago." His eyes narrowed. "I didn't agree to anything. This house wasn't supposed to go to people like them." The words hung in the air, cutting through the crowd. Gasps rippled among the neighbors, and even Olivia paused before replying. But then she dropped a bombshell. "Mr. Jackson, not only did you agree to sell, but you also signed documents transferring ownership after we settled your outstanding debts with the bank." Her voice grew sharper. "And I have the receipts to prove it." The crowd erupted into hushed chatter. Sarah and James looked at each other, their shock mirrored by the growing unease on Mr. Jackson's face. The situation wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was revealing secrets he had hoped to keep hidden. The crowd fell silent as Olivia handed Mr. Jackson a stack of papers, each one a signed acknowledgement of the sale. His hands shook as he looked through the documents, his face slowly draining of color. The reality of what was happening seemed to hit him all at once. You can't do this," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't real. Olivia remained unfazed. "It's already done, Mr. Jackson. You've already been compensated for the sale. And if you attempt to interfere with their right to live here, you'll be in breach of contract." James took a step forward, his heart racing. "We've done nothing wrong. We're just trying to move in, like anyone else." As the tension seemed to break, Mr. Jackson's shoulders sagged. He looked defeated, but just as Sarah thought they might finally be in the clear, he suddenly glared at them with a twisted smile. "Well, congratulations on your new home," he said coldly, turning to leave. "But just so you know, I won't be the only one watching. There's always someone who knows the truth about people like you." Before anyone could process his words, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Sarah's stomach tightened as she exchanged a confused look with James. Had they truly won, or was something darker still lurking beneath the surface? As the tension started to settle, Olivia gave them both a reassuring nod. "Don't worry. You're in the clear. But keep an eye on things. This isn't over just yet." The Wilsons watched as she walked away, wondering what else might be waiting for them in the shadows. The victory they had fought so hard for felt incomplete, the mystery surrounding Mr. Jackson's final words hanging heavy in the air. And with that, the future of their new home felt uncertain, leaving the Wilsons and the audience wondering what would happen next. Over the next few days, Sarah and James settled into their new home, their initial relief slowly turning into cautious optimism. Mr. Jackson never returned, and the whispers from the neighbors quieted down. Olivia's warnings still echoed in their minds, but they focused on what they could control, their new life together. Soon they learned that Mr. Jackson's threats were empty. He had no legal grounds to interfere, and after a thorough investigation, it became clear that his animosity was driven by a history of failed investments and shady dealings. His words were just a desperate last attempt to regain control over a situation he couldn't change. As the Wilson family unpacked their belongings, they couldn't help but feel empowered. They had fought for this home, and they had won. It wasn't just about property or ownership. It was about standing up for what was right. And for Sarah and James, this victory was more than just a new house. It was a fresh start filled with endless possibilities.